The conference chamber aboard the Vindicator of Accord was so large it distorted perception. Constructed from living crystal and carbon-fused alloy, the architecture pulsed faintly with ambient light, casting long, ethereal shadows across diplomats and envoys from 100 worlds. The central dais, raised like an altar to negotiation, hovered above the floor, magnetically balanced with alien precision. It was here, amid the grandeur and protocol of the galactic Concord, that humanity was finally allowed to speak. Captain Saren Vale stood rigid at the edge of the dais. Her fleet uniform was freshly pressed, navy black with silver trim, marked only by the insignia of Earth's Provisional Ambassadorial Command. Her features were taut unreadable, but her eyes burned with an emotion that had no name in any alien tongue. Around her, representatives of the Tathari Federation, the Threxan Synod, the Coveran Triarchy, and dozens more studied her not as an equal, but as a tolerated anomaly. They had invited Earth to observe, nothing more. The invitation came after the Third Hellenic Purge, where Earth vessels, responding to a local distress beacon, had intervened, illegally in a protected system. The humans had landed troops, evacuated refugees, and engaged Threxan patrols. Against all expectations, they had won. The Council demanded an explanation, and humanity had brought one. But now, under the high gravity of the Concord's primary arbitration vessel, it was not military action but cultural defiance that had ignited fury. It began when Vale's ship, the UNSS Resolute, entered orbit. A comms burst, unauthorized and impossibly loud, surged through the entire diplomatic comnet. No encryption, no identification handshake, just a raw signal fired into the Concord's audio systems, amplified by every relay and rebroadcaster. The sound was old, antiquated, a bold swell of horns and strings, the kind of composition unused by modern empires, but it gripped attention. It was Earth's anthem, ad astra per terra. To the humans, a declaration of unity and survival. To the assembled species of the Concord, it was something else entirely. It was noise. Immediately, the Coveran delegate issued a formal protest. The Threxan envoys hissed and turned away in synchronized disapproval. A contingent of Alari bioempaths visibly recoiled. Across the chamber, diplomatic aides scrambled to cut the transmission, but the signal was recursive, backed by subroutines that evolved with every attempt to silence it. It echoed in halls, buzzed through personal translators, and wormed into auxiliary channels. For 3 full minutes, the anthem of Earth defied a galaxy that demanded silence. And then it ended. In the aftermath, there was no applause, no comment, just the silent weight of judgment pressing down on the delegation from Earth. Vale stepped forward. "Esteemed members of the Concord," she began, her voice amplified by the chamber's translators. "The signal you received was no accident. It was the anthem of a species that remembers where it came from. We did not come here to forget." An immediate interruption. The Threxan High Chancellor uncurled from its platform, a towering mass of plated flesh and ceremonial implants. Its voice buzzed like broken circuitry. "You were instructed to observe. You violated the sanctity of concordal space. Cultural pollution is not tolerated. That sound is unacceptable." Vale didn't blink, it was music. "You dare to weaponize identity in a hall of peace," the Coveran delegate chimed in, its translucent skin flushed with anger. This was a calculated act of auditory aggression. From a row of neutral observers, Admiral Ngabu, commander of Earth's provisional fleet in concordal sectors, shifted uncomfortably. His orders had been to remain silent unless called upon, but he could feel the narrative hardening into condemnation. It was happening faster than expected. Humanity had arrived at the galactic table with no legacy, no reputation, no mythos to stand behind. They had only raw action and the memory of Earth, and now, even that was under attack. The council chair, a being of composite minds known as the Emzari Trinity, lifted its central arm. The chamber silenced. "Captain Saren Vale, Earth will submit a formal statement. Until reviewed, your delegation is suspended from deliberations." Vale met the gaze of the trinary intelligence and nodded once. Understood. She turned and walked off the dais with the slow, deliberate movement of someone walking away from a battleground, not a political reprimand. Behind her, aides and junior officers whispered among themselves. Among them, Ensign Khalid Rao, a communications specialist from Jakarta, shook his head in disbelief. "They're going to bury us for this," he muttered. Vale paused at the edge of the chamber doors. "Let them try." Outside the Vindicator of Accord, the UNSS Resolute floated in zero relative motion, her hull lined with new armor composites and retrofitted gravity wells. She was small compared to the great bioships of the Concord, but her lines were sharp, and her energy signature was hot with edge technologies reverse-engineered in defiance of treaties humanity had never signed. In the briefing room, Vale stood over a wide holomap. Red markers flashed across multiple systems, points of tension, conflict, or diplomatic freeze. The Anthem incident was a spark, but the fuel had been laid months before. Everywhere humanity went, they moved too fast, broke too many norms. Ngabu entered without ceremony. That wasn't a good move. They needed to hear it. They weren't ready to listen. Vale looked up, eyes hard. Do you remember what they told us at first contact? That we were too fractured to speak with one voice, that Earth needed a century of observation before consideration, that humans were volatile, disruptive. They weren't wrong, he said. No, they were cautious, there's a difference. Ngabu sighed. The Threxan bloc is calling for sanctions. They want us expelled from the Concord completely. Let them call. We're not here to seek their favor. We're here to be heard. We're here to be seen. On the far side of the room, Rao adjusted a console. Ma'am, we're receiving a scrambled packet. Origin unknown. Frequency matches the one used during the Ulenic Relay War. Vale's gaze snapped to him. Decode it now. As Rao worked, the lights dimmed slightly, an automated response to the data encryption being unraveled. When the packet finally decompressed, it formed a hologram, a face unfamiliar to any on board. It was alien, slender, eyes that moved too fluidly. Its voice was low, filtered through centuries-old translation algorithms. Humanity has declared itself with music. We did not expect this. We are listening. The feed terminated. Ngabu stared at the empty air. Who the hell was that? Vale turned back to the holomap, where now a new marker blinked, an uncharted system just beyond concordal reach. Someone who heard the signal. And across the galaxy, others were starting to listen. The UNSS Resolute broke from standard orbit under low-burn silent drive, slipping away from the Vindicator of Accord under the guise of routine navigational recalibration. No protests followed. The Concord didn't expect anything more from Earth than rebellion by implication. But inside the bridge, urgency replaced routine. The packet's signal structure is fractal layered, Ensign Rao explained, hands dancing over the projection controls. It used a modulation pattern derived from our own Anthem broadcast. Someone out there caught the frequency and mirrored it. Intentionally, they're answering in our language. Vale stood still at the center of the operations ring, watching the expanding star map with a fixed gaze. Rao enlarged the highlighted system. No official designation, no trade routes, no known settlements. Concordal space nominally ended a few parsecs before it. Anything in the deep archives? She asked. No surveys on record, Lieutenant Aaron Hess responded from the science console. Closest known civilization is the Kreth Fold, but this isn't their vector, this is someone else. Chart a jump, Vale ordered, quietly. If the Concord asks, we're following up on a long-range telemetry ghost. Ngabu leaned forward from the auxiliary chair. You're willing to walk blind into uncharted territory for a message without credentials. Vale nodded. They spoke back. That's more respect than the entire Concord's shown us. The Resolute's hull plates reconfigured for FTL harmonics, heat sinks cycling as ion buildup ramped through the drive core. A moment later, the stars folded away. 2 hours into the transit, the tension was a skin everyone wore. Vale sat in her quarters, the lights dimmed, the old Earth flag stitched into the back wall. Earth, not the United Nations of the Terran sphere. Blue and green, scarred continents, fractious and unyielding. She stared at it in silence. There was a knock. Enter. Rao stepped in, carrying a small data cube. Captain, we've isolated a secondary signal embedded in the packet. It's musical, not the same structure as the Anthem, but it responds to it, a kind of layered call and response. Vale took the cube, inserted it into her terminal. The sound that followed was alien, multi-tonal, dissonant, but undeniably intentional. In its chaos was pattern. It was a song, but not meant for human ears. They're answering in their own way, she murmured. Rao nodded. We think they heard not just the Anthem, but the message beneath it, that we weren't asking permission anymore. Vale turned toward the viewport. Then we'll answer in kind. The system at the other end of the jump was raw and dust-choked. A red dwarf bled dim light into the cold expanse, its lone planet barely more than a molten rock haloed by debris, yet the signal originated here from a point inside the debris field, hidden. Hess brought the feed up on the main screen. There, not natural, geometrically perfect array of reflective panels, it's broadcasting in a tight spiral. Ngabu frowned. Who builds a transmitter in the middle of nowhere? No one who wants to be found, Vale answered. Or someone who wants the right kind of ears. The Resolute edged closer, threading through the debris like a needle through cloth. There was no sign of ships, weapons, or structures, only the array, pulsing slow like a heartbeat in vacuum. As they drew near, something shifted. The array turned. And then light. A tight beam lanced from the center not as a weapon but as a stream of visual data. Ancient star maps, pulse rhythms, fractal structures mimicking planetary formations. It was a primer, a sequence, a bridge of understanding. Then at the end, a symbol. Not a word, not an emblem. A human hand open, palm out. Vale stared. That's not just imitation. It's acknowledgement, Hess whispered. Ngabu crossed his arms. If they're watching us, they've been watching for a long time. Back in Concord space, consequences rippled. The Concord High Table gathered in emergency session aboard the Axis of Harmony. Their crystalline chamber pulsed in discontent, each faction broadcasting silent disapproval. The humans have left the Accord's jurisdiction without filing a travel disclosure, hissed the Threxan representative. They vanish into a non-aligned system and fail to respond to inquiries. This is not observance, this is infiltration. The Mzari Trinity pulsed with flickers of concern. We must ask who responded to the anthem. No one answered. That silence alarmed them more than the anthem itself. The Resolute hung in the dark, watching the array. Then it activated again. This time the message was different, no data stream, no hand symbol. A star map rotating slowly, a star blinking at the edge. Not one in the Concord's records. Rao paled. It's on the other side of the fold, that's deep unknown space. And the signal's shifting. Hess's voice was tight. They want us to follow. Ngabu's voice was iron. We don't have orders for this. Vale's reply was calm. Neither did we when we saved the Ulenic colonies. Neither did we when we transmitted our anthem. We didn't ask permission then either. She turned to the crew. We go. But they were not the only ones moving. Concord warships were already assembling in high orbit around the Vindicator. The Coveran flagship final jurisprudence aligned with the Threxan carriers. Recon drones had tracked the Resolute's jump vector. They would follow, quietly, and when they found the source of the signal, they would silence it. Humanity had stirred something ancient. And the old powers of the galaxy did not forgive trespass lightly. As the Resolute broke for the edge of known space, the crew prepared. Ngabu oversaw weapons drills. Rao filtered new data from the array, discovering strange harmonics that pulsed through human neural interfaces, triggering dreamlike responses. Vale stood alone at the prow observation deck, watching the stars. There was no returning to observation status, not now. The anthem had called out not just to the conquered, but to the forgotten, the listening, the waiting. Humanity had announced itself. And the galaxy had begun to whisper back. The edge of the fold wasn't a line, it was a distortion, a change in the behavior of space itself. Gravity weakened, particles scattered in strange harmonics. FTL drives began to whine against an unseen boundary. It was not a barrier built by matter, but by intent. Beyond it lay territory unmapped by concordal astrocartography, a region the elder empires described in theory but avoided in practice. Even the Threxans, with their ruthless expansionist doctrine, treated it like myth. The UNSS Resolute crossed without ceremony. No alarms, no welcoming force. Just cold, perfect silence. Inside the ship, comms died for a moment. No interference, no jamming, just absence. Rao's panel blinked blank. Every channel beyond ship-to-ship fell dead. Then something strange happened. Lights dimmed, then adjusted. Gravity shifted by 0.5%. Consoles recalibrated themselves, and on every screen a symbol appeared, the same open palm. Then a voice not through comms but in their minds, not speech but impression, a memory of listening, a sense of being known. Ngabu gripped the armrest of his command seat. What the hell was that? No translation protocol was active, Rao confirmed, his face pale. That was direct neural stimulation, it bypassed our hardware. Vale stood. We've crossed into a region governed by rules we don't understand. This isn't concordal space. This is something older. Ahead, a planet emerged, dark, mottled, half-buried in the glow of a dying white star. It bore rings of shattered satellites and orbital ruins, but beneath its clouds, active signals pulsed. And at the center, something was building. They descended slowly. Atmosphere was thin but stable, no biosignatures registered, but under the surface, deep, ancient power sources pulsed in regular patterns, artificial, still alive. The landing party consisted of Vale, Ngabu, Hess, and two specialists. No combat suits, no weapons active. This wasn't a hostile incursion. It was a reply to an invitation no one else understood. They landed amid black stone monoliths, scarred with glyphs that shifted depending on the angle viewed. Not holograms, not projections, some kind of cognitive resonance sculpted by materials unknown. Then a structure rose from the ground. Not built, grown. It formed itself from dust and glassy fragments, assembling in the air until it shaped a single, floating hall. Inside it stood a figure. Tall, vaguely humanoid, its surface shimmered with refracted light as if its body had no single form. It held no weapons, it simply watched them. Then it played the anthem. Perfect, unaltered, the exact transmission Vale had ordered through the Concord's Comnet. And over it harmonies layered, alien, yes, but synchronized with the original, an answer. Ngabu took one step forward. You're the ones who answered us. The figure did not move, but something passed between them, all memories not their own, wars fought in silence. Empires collapsed under the weight of stagnation, a time before the Concord when thought moved differently, when identity was power, not danger. Vale stepped into the structure. Why reveal yourselves now? The entity pulsed and words formed, not aloud, not in any language, but in truth. Because you broke the silence. Back in Concord space, the final jurisprudence and its fleet of Threxan and Coveran warships intercepted a drift packet from an automated probe. It had followed the Resolute's trajectory before being pulled into a gravitational dead zone and destroyed. But not before transmitting a single image. An energy structure, artificial and vast, folding above a planet unknown to the Concord, and humans walking within it. The Threxan Fleetmaster issued the order. Prepare suppression protocols. The humans have awakened something old. We must erase it before it spreads. But the Coveran had doubts. Their envoys had reviewed the anthem, had felt the resonance in ways they did not speak aloud. Some among them began to wonder if silence had been a mistake. Inside the ancient construct, Vale and her team followed the entity into a chamber that bent reality. No clear edges. Distance stretched and collapsed depending on where they looked. In the center stood a projection of the galaxy, animated but scarred. Certain regions pulsed with black rings, others with violet spirals. The entity spoke again, not in words but impressions. You are not the first to rise. Scenes emerged, ancient civilizations now gone, all had discovered the fold. All had begun to break silence, and each time they were erased by war, by fear, by the Concord's distant ancestors. Each time we waited, each time we were silent, until one of you remembered music. Vale frowned. You're saying the Concord has buried your existence before. They silence what they cannot predict. Ngabu stared at the galaxy map. But why us, why now? Because your anthem was defiance, not conquest, a statement of self. You are unpredictable, necessary. Then the image shifted. Conquered fleets moved through space toward the fold, hundreds of ships. Carriers, silencer cruisers, bioweapons platforms. The Concord was mobilizing, not to observe, to destroy. They're coming to kill the signal, Vale said. They are coming to preserve the lie of peace. The Resolute's orbit shifted as the ancient structure activated new fields. A protective lattice formed around the planet, not a shield, but a warning. Concordal ships nearing this point would experience distortion, malfunction, delay. But it would not last forever. Back on board, the crew reassembled. Hess reviewed the downloaded archives. Rao analyzed the signal patterns. They now had access to pre-concordal history buried for eons. But it wasn't just knowledge, it was technology. Modulation structures, waveform weapons, dataforms capable of thought, tools humanity had never imagined and no Concord protocol would allow. Vale stood before the crew. We've been treated like children among giants, but the truth is the giants are afraid, not of our strength but of our change. Ngabu stepped forward. And what do we do with this? We bring it back, she said, not just the data, the anthem amplified, the truth of what lies beyond the fold. Rao looked up from the console. We can send a burst, planetary level, it'll get through before they arrive. Vale nodded. Then do it. The Resolute lit the sky. An FTL-COM burst piggybacked on old Concord harmonics, encoded with the anthem and layered with the truth. a message not of dominance but of disruption. To every fringe colony, every neutral world, every culture that had felt the weight of Concord's silence, it was a rallying cry. You are not alone. You were never alone. The humans have spoken. Aboard the final jurisprudence, systems spiked, alarms triggered, and through the entire command structure one signal played, defiant, impossible, unasked for. The anthem of Earth. And across the fleet some ships hesitated, some captains lowered shields, some didn't know why but they listened. Because the silence had been broken. And something ancient had begun to wake the galactic fringe, was never quiet again. Within hours of the transmission, the human anthem echoed in places no earthborn voice had ever reached. It pulsed through forgotten trading stations, ancient relay arches buried beneath decaying moons, and derelict habitats sealed since before the Concord's founding. Each pulse was met not with alarms but with something stranger: activation. Systems that had lain dormant for millennia blinked awake, not with human energy but with a resonance that responded to what humanity had dared to send. In orbit around the dead star, the UNSS Resolute floated still, but no longer alone. They came first as glimmers on sensors, energy distortions, gravity waves, local space folding and unfolding as if touched by unseen fingers. Then forms emerged, ships if they could be called that, not metal, not biology, not recognizable, geometry bent around them, some flickered like memories, others pulsed like music made solid. Vale stood on the observation deck, watching the unknown arrive. "They're answering," she said. Ngabu stood beside her, arms folded behind his back. "We expected concordal retaliation, not them." "They heard the anthem," she said. "The others, survivors, remnants, or something older." The ships did not hail, they aligned. Around the Resolute, around the hidden world, forming a loose lattice that spiraled through three-dimensional space in a configuration no human mind could intuitively follow. But it was intentional. Rao translated the energy emissions. They're forming a structure, a carrier wave maybe, or a chorus. Vale turned to the command staff. "Record everything, no assumptions, this is the new baseline." The ships weren't preparing for battle, they were preparing to resonate. In the inner systems of the Concord, chaos simmered beneath the surface. The Coveran triarchy was fracturing. One of their mid-clans had declared neutrality, demanding a reassessment of humanity's status. The Threxan fleet marshal declared it treason. 3 warships were lost in the ensuing standoff. The Mzari Trinity issued a general statement, neither condemnation nor support, merely a warning. What has been awoken cannot be contained by law. On the moon station Cerulean's Edge, a coalition of minor species, long dominated by conquered economic pressures, voted unanimously to recognize Earth as a source state of emergent cultural precedents. In simpler terms, Earth's defiance had meaning. Then came the break. The Ilari, once passive, emotion-attuned beings, rerouted one of their memory towers into deep space comms. They played the human anthem, not in mimicry, but in harmony. Their ships, graceful and biological, began shifting course toward the fold. The Resolute systems couldn't keep up. The alien structure around the hidden planet had become a choir of signal pulses and synchronized waveforms. It wasn't communication in any recognizable sense, it was convergence. The ancient ships aligned with Earth's signal, amplifying it, learning it. On the bridge, Hess ran analysis. They're not just responding, they're incorporating it, making it part of a greater pattern. Rouse spun in his chair. One of the entities just sent a reverse modulation, encoded in 13-dimensional data. "We can't read that," Ngabu muttered. "We can feel it," Vale said. And they did. The ship thrummed, not in danger but in recognition. Earth's systems were adapting, reacting to knowledge humanity had no words for yet. The anthem, once a statement, had become a key. And it was unlocking something. Then the Concord arrived. Not silently, not peacefully. Hundreds of ships breached the edge of the fold, silencer-class cruisers, null drones, planetary denial carriers. The first contact was sharp and unmistakable. A Threxan cruiser launched a cascade barrage at the alien lattice. It passed through. The lattice didn't shield itself, it absorbed the attack. The geometry of the impacted vessel collapsed inward as if its own logic had been rewritten. A bloom of light marked its annihilation, not as destruction but as unmaking. The conquered fleet froze, and the alien formation began to move. Not toward the conquered, not toward Earth. Upward. The entire array, human ship, ancient vessels, planetary mind constructs, rose from the planetary gravity well, trailing harmonic pulses behind it, not fleeing, ascending into a phase-shifted dimension outside the Concord's weapon range. Vale ordered full sensory focus. Stay passive, watch, we're being carried. The Resolute systems howled with translation noise. Physical space blurred, ship mass dropped to near zero, the stars smeared into ribbons of waveform light. And then they were there. It wasn't a place. It was a state. A region of galactic geometry lost to conventional perspective. Threads of time intersected with song, physical laws bent in favor of cognition, memory had mass, intention had gravity. And in the center, a monument. Not built, sung. A great spiral lattice spinning in perfect synchronicity, formed of the same alien vessels that had answered Earth's call, and others, dozens, maybe hundreds, echoes of civilizations that had vanished from known space. A choir of the forgotten. Rao's voice was reverent. They've built a sanctuary from silence. Ngabu stared at the readings. This is what the Conquered fears, not weapons, not war, truth beyond control. Vale turned to the team. Begin transmission. What message? No message, the anthem. And so they played it again. No encryption, no qualifiers, no translation. Just the anthem of Earth, now joined by the harmonics of the old and hidden civilizations. A chorus layered with meaning, intention, pain, memory. Across the galaxy, the signal flared. Conquered suppression fields failed in every direction. Controlled narratives collapsed as sympathetic resonances struck buried systems. Old allies remembered broken promises. Minor cultures found strength in their own defiance. One by one, worlds began to echo the signal. Back at the fold's edge, the Conquered fleet hesitated. One of their own, the Coverin Command ship, cut power. Its commander transmitted a single word across open channels: enough. More followed. The Alari fleet aligned with the human harmonics. Then a Threxan vessel, a scout ship, flipped allegiance, flying into formation beside an Alari cruiser without firing a shot. The Conquered was breaking. In the sanctuary of song, the alien entities pulsed with a final harmonic. A fragment entered Earth's databases. Not a weapon, not a ship design. A map, not of stars, of thought. A guide for resonance between species, a framework for unity without assimilation, a protocol not of control but of harmony, long lost, now restored. Vale understood. It's a new foundation. Ngabu nodded slowly, not a replacement for the Conquered, an alternative. Vale looked at the spinning monument, then back at the Resolute, the only human vessel now surrounded by legends and survivors of ancient extinction. We came with a song, she said, now we write the next verse. The storm of change swept across the galaxy. The Conquered, once thought unbreakable, had no protocol for this. Their hierarchy depended on order, on managed evolution, on silence between species. Now the silence was shattered. The anthem of Earth, a mere fragment of cultural defiance, had been amplified into a signal too vast to contain. Worlds that had known only quiet compliance now pulsed with it. It became the music of awakening. In the city hives of the Vethari swarms, long silenced by Conquered economic doctrine, worker drones began repeating harmonic sequences resembling Earth's theme. On the border moons of the Garun nomads, signal monks carved Earth's anthem into the orbital rings of their gas giants. Even among the Threxan military caste, long bound by ritual and doctrine, defectors rose, some quietly, others through fire. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. A new thought form had entered the galactic equation, not born from conquest or assimilation, but from identity voiced into the void. And it had been heard. The UNSS Resolute returned from the sanctuary 6 days after the Conquered's fleets dispersed. It emerged not in stealth, but through the largest concordal transit gate near the central system of Iltris, seat of the High Council, not cloaked, not armed. Visible, daring them to respond. Inside the command deck, Captain Vale stood in full uniform. The old Earth flag patch gleamed on her shoulder. The anthem wasn't playing, now it didn't need to. Everyone knew its echo. It was present even in silence. Ngabu sat beside her, his expression like stone. We're violating every single directive issued to us. They could fire before we finish docking. They won't, Vale said. They're still listening. The bridge airlock cycled as they approached the council spire. And this time they weren't alone. Ships that had once belonged to forgotten species followed in formation, each an emissary of the sanctuary, not in a show of strength but presence, a coalition of the unheard, a reminder. The council's main chamber had changed. The dais was no longer bathed in shadowed superiority. Bright light filled it now, full spectrum, unfiltered. The Emzari Trinity no longer floated aloof. Their arms hung low, pensive, uncertain. Around them sat representatives who weeks ago would not have acknowledged a human's breath. Vale walked to the center alone. She didn't wait to be invited. We were told to observe, to wait, to be quiet. The chamber said nothing. We refused. The Threxan chancellor hissed but said nothing. We were told that our presence was too disruptive, that our history was too violent, that our voices were premature, but when we spoke, others listened, not because we were loud, because we remembered what you made them forget. The Coveran delegate raised one eyelid. You risked destabilizing the entire galactic order. No, Vale said, you already did that. You called it peace, but it was silence enforced with fear. You buried the past. You erased those who challenged you. We didn't break your order. We exposed it. The Emzari spoke slowly. And what do you propose now, Captain of Earth? Vale glanced back at the projection where the sanctuary's lattice spun in low-orbit holofield. A new assembly, outside your laws, a chorus of voices that have never been allowed to sing, a second axis built not on suppression but on resonance. Silence held, the Concord weighed annihilation, measured compromise, calculated risk. Then the Alari emissary stood. We have already joined them. A pause. Then the Vethari, we will follow. One by one other delegates rose, minor species first, then second tier, then Coveran. Not all, but enough. The Concord fractured not in fire but in transformation, a slow revolution born from a single note. The Resolute returned to Earth a month later. It did not return alone. A convoy of strange vessels followed in escort, ambassadors, architects, harmonists from the sanctuary lattice. Together they descended through the cold dark to orbit the blue sphere that had dared to raise its voice first. From the sanctuary, a gift had been left. A monolith seated in Earth's orbit formed from harmonic alloys and cognitive stone. It didn't transmit, it didn't speak. But if one stood before it and listened long enough, they would hear fragments of the anthem, wrapped in other melodies from other cultures, each layered with meaning only a world in unity could begin to decipher. It was called the First Harmonic, and it meant the galaxy would never forget what humanity had sung. Years passed. The Concord was no longer singular. It became one voice among many in the expanded assembly of resonant powers. Earth, once a footnote on the outer arm, now sat in a central ring. Not dominant, but foundational. Captain Saren Vale became Ambassador Vale, then later, the first human elected as a harmonic arbiter, an interspecies post designed to mediate cultural transitions between civilizations. She never stopped wearing her Earth flag. Ngabo retired in the sanctuary lattice, serving as a liaison to newly awakened species. Rao founded the Institute of Cognitive Harmonics, creating a universal syntax of cultural music transmission. Lieutenant Hess disappeared into the depths of unknown space with one of the sanctuary fleets, last seen near a black star where memory itself was said to warp. But across it all, the anthem remained. Not as propaganda, not as noise. As foundation. A reminder that the smallest voice, raised with conviction, can awaken an ancient silence. That music, once banned, could become the instrument of rebirth. That humanity, once disregarded, had become the galaxy's signal fire. And as new species emerged from the dark, they asked one question first. Who were the ones who dared to sing? And the answer echoed, now encoded in every harmonic beacon from the sanctuary to the conquered rim. They were human.